Hello, everybody. So welcome to what is the first of a series of conversations and demonstrations around seed saving, seed keeping, all things having to do with seeds. For those of you that are familiar with Pierce Conservation and Harvest Pierce County, you probably have heard about our seed swap, our annual event where community members swap seeds and also the stories about those seeds connected to them. We realized that a lot of people who are connected to plants in Pierce County are connected to our programming through the planting, the harvesting, the growing. But aside from the seed swap, we actually don't talk that much about seeds, and we actually don't talk that much about what it takes. And often people get really excited about looking through seed catalogs. Like that's how we talk about seeds. Like how do you read a seed packet, for example? But it goes so much deeper and so much further. And so we're very excited to have Forrest Shomer, our guest, with us here today to talk a little bit more about that seed connection, how it really closes the circle of our full circle connection with plants. So I'm Renee Meshi. I work with Harvest Pierce County, a program of the Pierce Conservation District. I'd also like to allow my co-host to introduce themselves. Saire.
Hi everyone, my name is Saire Rafai, and I also work at the Harvest Pierce County program of the Pierce Conservation District. I'm really excited to meet you today, Forrest, and thank you for taking the time to share some of your knowledge with us.
Yeah, and so Forrest, I'm going to give a brief introduction to Forrest's past and what brings him on the path that he's on today. Before I turn it to you, Forrest, to introduce yourself a little bit. You might have heard of Forrest if you've heard of Inside Passage Seeds, which is a seed company specializing and focusing in native plant species out of Port Orchard. And I know the Pierce Conservation no, it's not out of Port Orchard.
Port Townsend.
Port Townsend. I'm sorry about that. My non-Pierce County knowledge is not as precise. Out of Port Townsend. That basically we've, as Pierce Conservation District, I know I've gotten seeds for restoration projects. It's really fascinating work. We're going to put the link in the show notes, and we're going to link to that if you'd like to read a little bit more about it. As for Forrest, he began saving seeds in 1969 and has been a full-time independent professional seedman since 1973. As we were talking about, he founded and directed the nonprofit Abundant Seed Life Foundation in 1975, transplanted to the Olympic rain shadow in 1977, and settled in Port Townsend, not Port Orchard, in early 1980, producing and distributing up to 600 types of seeds and open pollinated vegetables, herbs, and flowers, along with Northwest native species. Since 1992, he's operated and owned Inside Passage Seeds, which lists 200 seeds of tree, shrub, wildflower, and grass species of the coastal Northwest from Southeast Alaska to Northern California. So ever since 1974, he's regularly given workshops on seed saving, herbs, and related issues of genetic diversity. And you might recognize him from some of the permaculture conferences and convergences that have happened, and plant exchanges. He's served his community and leadership roles in Sacred Agriculture, Parks Commission, County Noxious Weed Board, Native Plant Society, and many other ecology-centered ways for more than 40 years. So all of that said, there's so much more to that story than that summary. So we're extremely honored to have you here with us today, and I would like to pass it to you, Forrest, to introduce yourself and your seed path and what brings you here with us today.
Well, thank you, Renee and Sairi. I feel like Pierce is kind of ahead of the curve. I think you should all know that. Certainly among counties in Western Washington in the realm of hands-on practical things in the environment, in ecology, in gardening. And that's a launch board for people. They don't even know right now. You may be listening and you may be at the beginning of a career that you hadn't even imagined. And I just want you to know that it's being fostered by the county. And if you were in Franklin County, you probably wouldn't be getting that right now. So congratulations there. I actually have one or two colleagues in Pierce County who have contributed to my seed distribution, which is the main act in my life right now. It goes on typically through about October. We're just madly harvesting all the time, and the days are getting shorter, so it's, you know, both ends against the middle. Yesterday I was out in Skagit County where I have some contract work with the land trust, and had to dash back in order to catch the ferry to get home, and watching the daylight fading away quicker and quicker. So that's the nature of harvest, and we're right at harvest moon this week. So what was I doing there? It kind of touches on a couple things you've already brought up. They're having me on this particular project harvesting primarily woody species, the seeds of native woody species. There's about 20 on our list. Some are trees, some are shrubs, some are quite common that everybody knows, like let's say wild rose, and then some are relatively uncommon, and that's what I was doing yesterday. I was harvesting something called Coastal Juniper. And amazingly, even though I've been doing this for almost 50 years, I never heard of Coastal Juniper until this year. It was on my harvest list to collect this juniper, so I thought it was common juniper. And then my colleague at the organization, the conservation organization there, said, no, this is unique to just a few of the San Juan Islands. I said, I've never seen it. She said, well, I'll show you where it is, and then you can collect it for us. So we made a first visit there about 2 or 3 weeks ago, explored all the nearby area where it seems to be pretty well established, but not frequent. And then yesterday I went back, and on a beautiful sunny morning, I spent about 2 hours harvesting juniper berries. I actually have some right here, come to think of it. So I'm going to show you.
Love to see those.
I mean, beautiful too to think that, Forrest, you've been doing this work for 40 years and you're still learning and like becoming in relationship with plants in our backyard.
These are the Coastal Juniper berries. They're blue when they're ripe. And that's like right now, it was really good when I went there the first time. They were a little bit greenish, so I just try to pick a few just in case I didn't get back there, but it got better. And I'm just trying to find a way to show you this so that you can get a better idea.
Yeah, I can see they have like a beautiful frost on them, some of them.
Yes, yes. So while I was picking, someone came along and they said, oh, are you making, see, what's the, it's not rum, I don't think. Some other beverage that's related to that uses juniper for flavoring, I guess. So that was, oh, gin, I think she said. Are you making gin? I'd never thought of that one before. Yeah, so that was, I went from, common to most unusual, certainly the most unusual for me this year. So these, it looks like I've got maybe 2,000 or 3,000 berries there. And then they're going to go into this planting project, and they'll be used for revegetating disturbed sites, primarily on sunny, even rocky exposures along the edge of the water up there in the North Sound. So that's kind of in a nutshell is the nature of the work I do. Then I went up the valley to a spot that I picked last year because this project is about a 4-year project. And I had a collection site for vine maple, which is a pretty well-known plant. That's the leaves are just turning right now, coloring up here the last week of September. So people may recognize it from roadsides and forest edges where it's turning orange and red. And I got there and the trees that I picked last year had been partially whacked. So this happens a lot, that the people that are doing landscape maintenance professionally, and especially for, agencies like, let's say, the county, are mostly being trained to use machinery. And this particular situation could have been solved with the loppers. What had happened was the Himalaya blackberries had gotten up into the middle part of the tree, and then they kind of dangled from the tree, and they got in the way of the mower that runs past the tree. So instead of cutting the blackberries, the operator whacked the tree instead. It just drives me crazy to see, this absence of consideration and skill. And that's the way people are being trained right now. So we can do better. I hope some of the people watching this realize, you can be an artist, you can be a skilled craftsperson. You don't have to just be a machine operator to do a good job. You can do a better job. So I just took 10 or 15 minutes. I had a loppers with me, and I cut all the blackberries out of that vine maple or two. And then I just started to harvest the seeds, which were ripe. It was a lot less than last year because of the whack job that happened. But maybe next year things will have improved, and now the blackberries aren't in the way again. So that was actually more than I wanted to say in a nutshell, but this just kind of devils me all the time that people are no longer gardening. They're just, operating machinery. So that's an industry. That's like industrial environmental protection. I don't think that really is the answer. And I think you touched on that earlier too, talking about before this interview, really about the conservation district as opposed to the work that you guys are doing. And so I hope your audience is that which takes more care, specific care, and has relationships with the plants. Doesn't see them just as objects that are either, to be harvested or part of a beautification strategy or in the way and, need to be mowed or cut or whatever. To see them as relatives and give them the care that you would give and that you would expect from others as relations.
Thank you, Forrest. I'm curious how you began starting to, I don't know if you use the term saving seeds or prefer seed keeping, how that journey started for you and the reasons why you do the work.
Great question. So I was in the People's Park upheaval in Berkeley in 1969. I was a graduate student. About 3 blocks from People's Park, which many people will not know of, but it was a historical event because it was literally the kickoff of the environmental movement. It was exactly 1 year before Earth Day. And in that time, we, who were the community of street people, students, and anyone who cared to take part, converted a large part of a city block into a hands-on garden. The university had torn down a bunch of buildings there to erect something, I don't know what, but they, I guess, didn't have all the resources in place, so the lot sat there for about a year, and people began to park cars on it. It was just pretty disorderly, and it became very muddy, and there was erosion and so forth. So then a bunch of neighborhood people said, let's beautify this, let's make a park here. Nothing like that had ever happened before. Cities make parks, not citizens at that point. So for about 6 weeks, we had what was kind of like a large street garden party And there were hundreds of people, and we were eating together, cooking food in 50-gallon drums, playing music, planting flowers. It was a festival, but the university did not take kindly to the whole idea. So they got the governor involved, none other than Ron Reagan, and he sent in the National Guard. Overnight, they put up a chain link fence around the entire block. And the next day, there were soldiers there with bayonets to keep us out of the park. There's movies about it and books. Anyway, there was a riot. Somebody got killed, and there was 2 weeks of tense standoff and aerial spraying of the campus at one point, and a march with 30,000 people. It was really quite the coming of age moment. Well, in the midst of that, I started to get my directions for my life from the teach-in that took place one day on the campus, where some very illustrious speakers came. And the last speaker in the program was the poet Gary Snyder, who is still alive at 93 years old and was just like a beacon for just so many people in that time. His name invokes reverence from thousands of people. And he had just written a book called Earth Household. And that is the literal translation from the Greek ecology, ecology, that's Earth Household. And I was very inspired. Then I heard him speak. I became more inspired. He presented two friends who said, these people can take you out into the mountains and teach you lore. So I signed up, and I spent the whole summer, hiking in the Sierras and the Coast Range, and beginning to learn wild plants and how to fish. And I had a life-threatening experience on a glacier, and it was a pretty busy year. And then People's Park became unavailable, so we had an alternate site that was not contested by anybody, about a mile away from there, and that was called People's Park Annex. So in the first few weeks, I was out there with others, and we were gardening, trying to build rockeries and plant things. And this elderly Quaker lady came along, and her name was Lucy Hupp, and she was a garden writer for a community paper. And she said, I'm going to teach some of you how to garden. So she picked about 4 of us, and every week she would come gather us and scoot us off to her little homestead, which was about 1 acre on the other side of the hill from Berkeley. And she taught me all the essential things that I've been practicing ever since, like, how to prepare and store food, how to harvest plants, the different flowers and herbs and fruits. And she had it all in one garden. And then one day, after about 6 weeks, she showed me how to collect seeds. So that was initiation, and I've been doing it ever since. That was 52 years ago last month, basically.
Do you remember some of the first seeds that you were saving with Lucy?
Absolutely, yes. The very first thing that she showed me was Nigella. Love the mist. It's a blue flower. And when the seed capsule on top of the plant is ready, the little seams open up, and it looks like a little salt shaker. And so you just turn the capsule upside down, and the seeds just spill right out. So, a beginner's seed pod. Well, I guess that was the moment. So yeah, everything builds on that. Then I can also remember some of the first native plants that I collected about 5 years later. I had already started my first, actually second seed business by then. After about May, I didn't really know what to do with myself. I mean, I had sold my seeds, and so what do you do in the rest of the year? Well, you raise plants and you harvest plants. And I was fortunate to have access to a Seattle herb garden where I could collect to my heart's content. And then I started to range out beyond that. At the end of the year, I got a hold of some Nootka rose. That's our basic wild rose. Those were the first native seeds. And then the next year I thought, this is really good. I'm going to really get into it. So I started doing backcountry trips, just looking for seeds to collect. One in particular, I hiked the Grand Ridge in the Olympics. which connects Obstruction Point and Blue Mountain for people who know the Olympics. It's really an epic hike at about 6,000 feet. Nobody else was on the trail. It was about the 1st of October, and I just went up there thinking, I'm just going to see what seeds I can find, and even if I can identify plants by their seeds, because it's too late, you know, the flowers are gone. So what are they? I got about 15 or 16 different species, and I was able to identify almost all of them, mostly by recognizing their families. And then I was able to, you know, look up and reference the species based on what I knew about the plant. So those were my initiations in the different aspects of the seed work. And I just committed myself to all of it, not just garden plants, especially not just garden plants from another continent like Nigella, but you know, the things that grow in the deepest part of the heart of the mountains. You know, that was a thrill for me, still is. In fact, I still go up to that trail every few years and I collect lupin and a few other things there.
Beautiful. And you have some plants and seeds to share with us today and what you're saving. Renee, were you going to ask a question?
Well, I did have a couple follow-up curiosities that came to mind while you were speaking, and one of them was back to the coastal juniper. I'm wondering, you said it's only found on certain islands in the San Juans at this moment, but is it possible that it used to be far more widespread, but because of development, maybe not anymore, and maybe now it could be spread to, or is it just native to those particular islands?
I think if it has contracted at all, it's only in the San Juans. I don't think it was elsewhere in Puget Sound. We do have common juniper in a lot of locations in the Olympics and also in the Cascades, also at lower elevations as well as in the mountains. But this is a separate species which evolved there under, you know, somewhat unique conditions, because the San Juan soils are, you know, tend to be rocky near the surface. Basically the San Juan Islands and the nearby areas like Chuckanut Mountains are what they call a sunken mountain range. So millions of years ago, that central part of the North Sound was a higher mountainous area, and then it kind of gradually subsided. And so the soil got scraped off the tops of the peaks by the retreating glacier about 10,000 years ago. And that's the unique soil type that's there. So that's why I don't think you would find it, for example, on the lowlands of, you know, like flat areas like South Sound. However, it's interesting that some prairie species are found in both locations. So for example, there was signage at the location that I was harvesting. It named some of the species that you would see there in the summertime. One of them was rosy plectritis, which is a little pink wildflower that I find on Whidbey Island, right next to the water. I know that it grows through the South Sound. I've seen it in Portland in a nature conservancy area. And now I know that it also grows on sunny hillsides in the San Juans. So that's just really, you know, for me is like, I want to be learning new stuff from doing this work. And that's something that I just learned yesterday.
Beautiful. Another question that came up while you were talking about trees is, why plant a tree from a seed? What comes with planting a tree from a seed that maybe propagating or other ways of doing it? Like what's the difference and why do it from a seed?
Well, first we want to realize, and I'm sure not all the watchers today are knowing this, but plants can propagate in more than one way. Some species exclusively grow from seed. Some species exclusively grow from rooted plant parts, and some species can grow both ways. So for the juniper, because it's a dry land species, it only grows from seed. That's the reason to collect the seed. If you're going to try to grow more of it and you reintroduce it or originally introduce it to another location, you have to start with the seed. Whereas with, let's say, well, the wild rose would be a good example. It can grow from seeds. It often does. It gets spread by wildlife, and that's how it's so frequent. but it also, if it's lying on the ground and there's some earth around it and it gets very wet, then it can send out roots from the stems and or resprout from cut plants. And so you've got two ways to go there. I think the example that most people would understand that's counterpart is garlic. So with garlic, most people propagate it from dividing the cloves at the base of the stem, which are, pretty large and really easy to handle. And in 1 year, 12 months, you can grow another one just like it, another clump. But if you take the top sets, they're not quite seeds, but they're kind of like fleshy seed-like things on the top of the stem, on the flower. And you divide those, there's maybe 40 on the head. So you've got the option of dividing a clump into maybe 10 parts and getting it next year, or you could take the top and divide it 40 ways, but you have to wait 2 years. So, I mean, it's just interesting how nature works that way. It really has, more lessons in it than just growing the material, but like making some choices. Are you in it for the long haul? So for example, for a lot of people, they might be thinking, well, I don't know if I'll be gardening 2 years from now, or at least at this location. So I guess I'll go for the quick score instead of, I'm really here for the duration. So I'm going to like invest in this and maybe really get serious about garlic and raise a whole lot of it slowly and let it really be well established in this location. I mean, it's just a choice one makes, like I said, about relationships with the plants. So I think the first way, it's more like you're using the plant. And the second way, it's more like you're fostering and supporting the plant. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just saying that those are the kind of choices we make in relationships too. It's like maybe if you have a teacher for 1 quarter, that was your relationship. But then if you have somebody who's your faculty advisor, that's more of a commitment. Just, just
Yeah.
riffing on the idea that the plants anyway have, multiple ways of propagating.
Is there a plant that you consider a mentor in that way to you? Is there a particular plant you have a special long-term kind of mentorship relationship with?
Wow, I have so many relationships with different species. So, well, Nigella, I haven't collected for a long time because I don't grow it anymore. The next plant that came in view, and this was again from what Lucy taught me, I was crossing the southwestern desert in the winter with a group of people, and we pulled off on a roadside somewhere in, I'm going to say northern Arizona. I'm not even sure where it was. And I recognized a desert plant, as little experiences I had at that time, and it was ephedra, which is a powerful herb that I've come to know and use since then. Sometimes called Mormon tea, and I don't remember why, but I already knew the plant, and I thought I should harvest this for medicine. So that was really my first, medicinal wildcrafting experience. And it just happened completely spontaneously. And I think I might even still have that. I mean, it became so treasured that I thought, well, I don't dare use this. This is really special stuff. I think it might be in a paper bag in my cupboard. Yeah. So then, in terms of other special things, redwoods became very special to me. I lived the following year, from what I've described there, I was in the Northern California redwoods. And then redwoods do grow both ways. That is, you can grow a redwood from seed, or if you have a trunk that's lying down, maybe a fallen tree that still has some life force in it, and it becomes partially covered with earth, it may send roots out into that earth and start, like people find redwoods growing in a line. So what that line is the sprouts that came up from former branches on the original tree. It's just really a miracle of, forestry. So yeah, that plant became very special to me. And I actually collect redwood seeds here in Washington, not every year, but I know where they all are. I've collected in Seattle, Port Townsend, and a whole bunch of other places. Not that there's a big demand for it, that you know, I don't need to do that, but it just became a fascination of like meeting all the redwoods that one can meet. They're finite. There's not that many of them. There's a few anyway.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. As Sairi mentioned before, we went off in that direction. You do have some seed saving that you're prepared to show us today. What are those plants?
Well, I've got two set up here for demonstration. They're not harvest demonstrations, unfortunately. I don't have anything at arm's reach here that I can show people in terms of the harvesting. We all know how to pick berries. Well, that's about 30 or more native species right there. So you can imagine that. And we probably have all had some familiarity with things that are, let's say in the sunflower family, which is all the daisies. There's just dozens of them. And sunflower would be a great example. I think everybody has some idea of how you harvest sunflower seeds, because you can just, when they're ripe, brush them off the flower head, and there you have next generation sunflower potential. You've got food, you've got wildlife food. And the one thing I want to say about that family is that there's not too many representatives of the daisy family in Western Washington. And the reason for that is that they are a sun-loving family, and they hold their heads up high. And because of the pervasive drizzle and rain and so forth, sunflower family members will get their pollens washed away in some years. So they have not succeeded that much in this climate. If you go east of the mountains, they're prevalent, but we do have some. So for example, in Pierce County, one of the wild plants you will find, if you really have to search for it now because it hasn't been supported a lot, and that's the balsam root. So it has a yellow sunflower-like flower head about 2 inches in diameter. It grows on native prairies. Not too many other places. I have found it on roadsides. And it grows about, like a foot and a half high. It has big basal leaves that lie down on the ground eventually. And, you know, a great plant to get to know. Very easy to collect the seeds. Birds will be all over it as soon as the seeds are ripe. So if you find it and you want to propagate it, which I hope you will, because it needs support, you just go back as soon as the petals have drooped and the plant is starting to turn a little bit brown, then go pick those heads off. And it's very easy to separate the seeds because they'll fall right out of the seed head, just like a garden sunflower. So that's, you know, representing a family like that. Then there are things in pods. So that includes notably in the Puget Sound lowland, lupin. More recently, you would include California poppy, which was not native here, but has spread widely because mainly because of being introduced by custom blends of wildflowers that people are buying, most of which are based on California species because they're fast growing and showy. Whereas most of our wildflowers are slow growing and take more than 1 year to reach flowering stage. But both have the tendency to have explosive pods, both the lupin and the poppy, as an example of one method of dispersal. So when the pods are ready, usually in most species they're brown, sometimes they're black. On a warm day, the pods will just fly open. And I guess everybody knows Scotch broom, and it's doing the same thing. So what I do there is I try to pick them just before the pods are likely to go, even 1 or 2 days before. Usually they'll tell me they're ready because maybe the lowest pods on a stem will start to pop open and the top ones will still be intact. That is the optimal moment to harvest that seed head. And then I'll put it in a closed space like a paper bag, put the paper bag in the sun and let the sun do the rest of the work, popping them open and being able to catch the seeds in the paper bag. Very easy to do. I would demonstrate it, except it's too late in the year to find those, and you all just got it. It's so simple. The things that I can demonstrate today, though, in processing, I've got two set up here. One of them is evergreen huckleberry, which is the last of the blueberry family to ripen. Grows a lot in Kitsap County and many other locations, so many people will know that one. I'm going to process it from berries, clean berries that I have, down to almost clean seed for you. And then I've got some camas seed, the blue camas that grows on the Pierce County prairies, like at JBLM and elsewhere. And these seeds were harvested by one of my collaborators about 2 months ago. And he pretty much cleaned them, but I always do a final on them to make them impeccable. So we're going to work a little bit with that, and it'll give me a chance to show you the very simple equipment that I use. A lot of the equipment I have, as you'll see shortly, literally came out of like secondhand stores. I didn't invest thousands of dollars in elaborate things. And my most important device is working with the wind. Wind does a lot of my work. So yeah, I've got those two. Do you want to talk about anything else before we start moving around?
No, I'm excited to see them. I guess the only other thing I would point out is for any of you who are watching, if you've ever gotten plants from our native plant sale, you might have evergreen huckleberry. So this could be a great way to make that one go even further. And if you've got the berries, whereas like you said, sometimes like you can propagate, but if you actually get the seeds, you can help the plant spread so much more with that way.
Right. So I'm my device here and see if I can set it up next to my work area, and we'll get that squared away, and then I'll demonstrate the work. Okay, so this is a blender. Can you see it back here?
We can.
Good. Okay.
Perfect.
So here's a bag of evergreen huckleberry. This is difficult to do, but they come in two colors. They're either blue, or more commonly, they're kind of a reddish black. These were harvested maybe a week ago, so they're quite fresh. They're probably still edible, but I'm just going to do the demonstration instead of eating them right now. Here's a household blender. Going to fill it about halfway and then add water. And blend. I've got a little plastic bucket, which I found, I think, in a vacant lot somewhere about, I don't know how many years ago. And then I have a screen, like a wire basket screen, like you get at a kitchenware supply. I have many different sizes of them in two different meshes. So this is a 16th inch mesh, which is kind of the common one. That's like window screen. And then I have one which is a little bit finer. So it gives me some options about how I can filter seeds of different sizes. So what's happening now is the seeds and the juice are running through the screen, and the skins and larger material is getting trapped on the screen. I'm going to help it along a little bit. Okay, so I'm confident now that I've washed all the seeds free of the pulp. And what we have at this point is this kind of interesting looking liquid with, it's not as thick as huckleberry juice, so I don't think it's really drinkable, but the seeds have now sunk to the bottom. I'm going to float off the juice. So the herbal word for this is decant. Give it one more rinse and we're just about there. I don't know if I'm getting this right, but you see the residue there. That's all seed and it's just about clean. I would say there's probably from that little blender batch, there could be as many as 10,000 seeds there. It's a very small seed. Now I've got this little tea strainer. One of the many little screens that I have, and I'm going to, I know that this seed will not pass through the tea strainer. And then I'm going to use osmosis to draw the moisture off of it from below. And the only thing left at this point is to dry the seeds. And then we've got, ready to go planting material. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to put the strainer in my dehydrator. So I'm going to walk you over to the dehydrator, the same kind that people use for making like dried apples and things like that. I use it mostly for seeds.
So the blender doesn't damage or hurt the seeds at all, huh?
Good question. It depends on the size of the seed. So these are very small and they pass through the blending process with no problem. And I'll show you a larger seed, which sometimes gets nicked in the process. So I have to do more hand work with that. But pretty much everything smaller than the Indian plum, which I'm about to show you, will blend without being damaged. It's about, I would say, a seed that's larger than about maybe a 1/16 of an 1/8 of an inch in diameter is getting close to the point of where they might get nicked by the blades. But if they're smaller, like these tiny little, where are they? There we go. Huckleberry seeds, no problem. Okay, so here's my dehydrator. It was kind of custom built for my needs, but there's many others like it. So we have shelves with custom made screens on them. I'm getting that. Let's see. Here we go. Just pop it back in there. I have actually, this is a double decker, so there's about 13 shelves altogether. And at the moment, I don't have a lot in here, but I do have, here's an entire tray of serviceberry or Saskatoon seeds drying. They're just about done. That was yesterday's work. And let's see if I can, so just get an idea of this consistency of them. This came out of a bucket of about, I would say 30 or 40 pounds of original material. And so I use the dehydrator to evaporate the moisture off. I keep it on a low heat. And it takes, for that species, it takes about a day to get to a drying consistency where I can store the seeds for a while. The thing to watch out for, of course, is if the seeds are too moist and you put them in a sealed container, like a plastic bag or bucket, they can't evaporate any additional moisture they might be clinging to, and then mold is a definite hazard. And by way of demonstration, here's my Indian plum bucket that I mentioned. So these actually I had to work on twice because even with all the experience I have with this, I put them into a bag. I think it was even a paper bag, and they were a little too moist, and they actually started to have just a touch of blue mold on them. So I washed them all over again and put them back in the dryer for the second time. The first time I was drying them after the pulp had been removed. The second time I was just re-drying, and now they seem to be fine. So I don't see any sign of mold on them, and I'm going to see if you can see that. So these are about, almost a 1/4 inch across, and they tend to get hurt more by the blending process. But almost anything smaller than that will work. I usually operate the blender on a low speed just to be safe. And trial and error, you find out pretty much what you can get away with. And I rarely have any injured seeds by doing this.
Does mold make them less likely to germinate?
What would be the
Is mold
the mold?
the danger of mold? Does it make them less likely to germinate or damage the integrity of the seed? Or
Yeah, mold would be terminal. If they even germinated, then mold would probably attack the emerging stem, and that would be it. So no, once seeds get moldy, you got to either do something like this fast, like wash and dry, or it's over. So that's definitely one of the hazards. Not a major hazard because most of the seeds are dry going in to your storage. But so what I use for storage primarily is paper, because paper breathes. Not all papers are equal, but if you used a sealed bag or like a bucket with a tight lid, any moisture that's already in there is going to gradually find its way, out and affect everything else that's in the bucket. And, it's just a tough lesson that I think most of us in the seed trade had to learn at some point. The first time I ever learned it, I had harvested some runner beans. They might have been scarlet runners, I don't remember, but I put them in a sealed container. And when I opened it, it was this cloud of blue mold rising out of it. That's all. That is, curtains for that batch.
Well, so dehydrating is really important. If somebody doesn't have a dehydrator, I know for food, for example, they say you can turn your oven on the lowest setting and leave the door propped open and dehydrate something that way. Can people do that with seeds if they don't have a dehydrator?
Probably. I have never done that, and I don't really think I want to recommend it because it's incredibly energy intensive for what you're trying to accomplish. But what I've got, I can't really show you this because it'll take too long to get to it. It's upstairs on my balcony. I've got some rhododendron seeds in the sun right now. And what happens there is the flower capsules open up and release their seeds gradually, and the sun helps the process along. But the other thing is that there's these little black insects that like to live on rhododendron flowers, and this gives them a chance to escape. And when the sun shines on those flower heads like it's doing right this very minute, because it's a beautiful warm afternoon for late September, those bugs can go wherever they go. I don't care, but they'll leave. It's not a friendly environment for them to be in the hot sun. And after doing that, it usually takes several days for them to all leave. Then I'll do a final screening of the rhodie seed, to get the seed separated from any flower parts, and finish off with a little hand inspection to pick out any of the flower stems. And then I've got a finished product. And I really go for, I just have a perfectionist tendency. And in a lot of places in my life that hasn't been welcomed by other people. But that's who I am. So it gives me a chance to be as perfectionist as I want, and nobody else is affected by it, but everybody else is benefited by it, I guess.
I was curious for some of the berries that have more segmented nature, like salmon berries, raspberries. Can you still do the similar blended method in saving those seeds?
Yes. Yeah, there's only 2 or 3 of the seeds that I wash that regularly need to be done more by hand. So then I just sort of mash them a lot. I let them get super ripe, and then I just work them. It's intense. It's sort of like I also do some massage work, so it uses the same fingers and muscles and so forth to mash it all up by hand. It's kind of like pureeing without the machinery. And then the same washing, filtering, drying process. I do want to mention, if anyone is curious about this, like those huckleberries, it takes about 40 pounds of evergreen huckleberry to produce 1 pound of seed. So only 2.5% of the material that you harvest is going to turn into seed. Well, what about the rest of it? So there's 2 other destinations for the stuff that I'm working with, if they're edible. And certainly huckleberry is a good example. So I have worked out a friendship with one of the local brewers here, and they're making custom beverages of native berries, like ciders and ales and things like that. It's pretty unique. There's only a few that do that. And that's called Propolis Brewery, and you can look them up in Port Townsend. It started in a garage, and it grew into a small warehouse, and they have a tasting room, and I'm really proud to be part of what they're doing. And so I bring them the fruit, like that huckleberry we just looked at. I had 100 pounds of those berries a few days ago. I took them to the brewery, and they're now pressed. They have a pressing operation for all kinds of fruits. And I can pick them up like later today and start extracting the seed in exactly the way that you just saw. And then I'll spread them on the screens, and within 2 or 3 days, I've got the finished product. So that's what I do. And we do that with salmonberry, Oregon grape, red huckleberry, and thimbleberry, and some more relatively exotic native fruits. So all the juice is being used. And then the pulp that's removed in the washing process, what I caught on my screen for you just now, that goes into my compost pile. So it's an incredible compost because it's mostly made up of shredded fruit and, kitchen waste and leaves and things like that. So, I mean, there is a lot of life in that compost pile. There's all kinds of things digesting in there. It's really delightful to watch. I don't know where they go in the winter, but right now they're jamming. So that was a big hurdle for me. For years, I thought, why waste 97.5% of the product? It took so much effort to collect it, but I had no other alternative. But now I have propolis, so no waste, zero waste. It's great, and they're only a mile from me, so even the commute is real short too.
That is great. I've actually tried some of their stuff before. I had no idea that you had that connection with them, so that's great.
Yeah,
They
they're winning
still around
prizes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're getting international notoriety because of the uniqueness of their brews.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really good, really interesting flavors.
Somebody might be thinking, well, can I make jams and preserves and strain the seeds off and use those? The problem with food processing is, in most cases, at some point, heat gets applied, syrups and things like that, jellies. And once you apply heat over, let's say, 100 degrees to the seeds, they're not going to live much longer. They're just not built for that. So we want to keep the temperatures fairly cool, like room temperature is good. It kind of leads to another question. Some people might be wondering about storing seeds. So the simple formula is, if the humidity and the temperature add up to less than 100, you've got decent storage conditions. So for example, in a household, the room might be at 65 degrees, the humidity might be 20%. You're in the ballpark. Not a whole lot to really worry about there. It's only when it gets really hot or there's too much moisture that bad things can happen to your seeds.
Well, that's really good to know. Thanks for sharing that. And I want to recognize that we're at the end of the time that we had scheduled, but I know you had another seed to show us. So I wanted to check in with you to see if you still have time to show us that, or maybe we could do it a different time.
Let's go do it. Yeah, this
Okay.
won't take long.
Yeah, so this is camas that we're going to see.
It is.
Yeah, could you tell us a little bit about camas?
Sure. It's the signature plant of our prairies. Now, prairie is a word that could probably use a little bit of definition. So prairie is kind of like our ancestral human habitat. Prairies exist on multiple continents. They have different makeup. So on some continents, it might be, the grasses might actually be grains, like food grains, that then became cultivated for, like, let's say, ancestral wheat, and its relatives would be a prairie plant mixed together with certain combination of indigenous flowers in various habitats. So it's interesting that the basic constituents would be a grass, a flower, and a legume. So for example, the legume in Pierce County might be lupin. The grass might be tufted hairgrass, and then, or fescue, and then the flower might be camas. I had a friend who wrote a book that kind of describes what she thought was an important dietary plan. It was called, let's see if I remember it now, something, a grass and a grain and a, oh heck, I don't remember. But basically, the food plan is that you use a grain, like let's say rice. You use something that was leguminous, like let's say mung bean. And then you add something that was a flower, like let's say ginger, and you've got your basic, building block of your diet right there. So we grew up on prairies. Our ancestors, thousands of years ago, gravitated to those places because they were open, which meant safety from predators, maybe more fun to be out in the sun too, for most people. Maybe there was game there. Maybe they can hunt buffalo or, sheep or something like that. And then they gradually became agricultural in that environment. So when we do this work, we're actually connecting with our remote agricultural ancestors and even the people before them who lived around the prairies. So in Western Washington, we had, by my count, at least 80 prairies originally before settlement. And I found them by using the Washington Atlas and studying it very close. Quite a few of them are in the South Sound, especially in Thurston and Pierce counties, especially at JBLM. Unfortunately, they get run over by tanks doing exercises. But you know, a lot of consideration has gone into that in recent years to try to protect the prairie habitats there. So people were living around the prairies and they would burn them every several years as needed to keep them from becoming encroached upon by woody plants. A lot of the edge plants were actually berries, so they could harvest for several years, things like thimbleberry, blackberry, rosehip, and so forth. And then when they started to become, you know, too prevalent, they would burn them back to the forest edge and open the prairie up. And then the potash from the burning was a fertilizer for the prairie plants, which were things like camas, chocolate lily, and others. So all of this together makes up your basic food and medicine of ancestral people of Western Washington, in addition, of course, to, you know, seafood and so forth. So that's a little bit about camas. It is being the signature species of the prairie. And here I've got some camas. I'll see if I can arrange the view so you can see this. And this again was from, let's see, it says, well, he doesn't tell me exactly where it's from. It was probably collected around Olympia. And I'll pour it out. Hold on for a second. So here's my basic tools. I have a bread pan. I have some screens that are mounted on wooden frames, just like the ones in the dryer, except smaller. And then I have a bag of camas.
And what part of the camas is this that you have?
So this is the seed. It's gonna be hard to, maybe you can catch it there in the bottom of the pan. They're black and not quite round, about the size of a poppy seed. And then you see the brown stuff, which is the chaff that was from the harvesting work. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour them through a screen that has a 1/8 inch opening, and which they will go through. And then I'm going to catch them on another screen that has a much smaller opening, so they won't go through there. But the dust will go through there. So I actually take this entire bag. Got about 1 and a fraction pounds here. Quite a bit of camas seed. And let's see, I want to do this so I don't get a lot of chaff on my computer. How do we do that? Let's see. Let's try this. I don't know if you can see the dust falling out the bottom. So here's the chaff that I caught on the top screen. And my compost pile is right here. So here it goes. And then here's the screen material, which I'm going to improve on in a moment. And then I don't know if you can see down here, there's some of the chaff that came through the bottom screen and dust. And finally, let me say something about this bread pan. The only real schooling I got in this whole process you're seeing was from the man who used to operate the botanical greenhouse on the University of Washington campus in Seattle, Dr. Gerard Vreeberg. So he was kind of my second teacher after Lucy. He was harvesting dozens of different medicinal species on campus there. And then he had like whole shelves full of bread pans with different harvests that he had done. So he showed me some of these processes because he was incredibly skilled at it. And then he gave me this one bread pan. So I'm using the same bread pan that I've had for 45 or more years that Gerard gave me. It's very special. I use it almost every day. And I could tell you more about its virtues, but we don't have time for that. So now I'm going to winnow. So winnowing is our ancestral relatives, ourselves in different lifetime, you might say, practice of removing the rest of the chaff from the harvested seed. And let's call camas the grain in this case, even though it's not, that's not its actual use. So we use the roots for food. And we just do this by pouring it from one container to another on a day with a nice light breeze. And this is exactly perfect conditions right now. So you'll see a plume of material blowing away. See how I can set this up. Here's my bucket. Okay, here we go. That work at all?
Yeah, so when you're pouring it, the wind is blowing away the chaff. Is that what's
Exactly,
happening?
exactly. So I'm going to have to do this multiple times, but when I'm done, the seed will be completely free of all the chaff. I'm just going to take one more minute here to, I'm just going to blow away some of the chaff so I can show you the finished product since you got this far with it. And if we wait for the wind to do it, you know, we might be here for a little more time than you have. So he showed me that if I blow on the kind of the end of the bread pan, it'll blow the chaff away. Okay, we're pretty close here, as close as we're going to get today, but it's starting to look like a finished product. So that's about as far as we can take it in this moment, I think, but you got the basics. And again, I want to emphasize probably the most expensive item here beside the screen was the plastic bucket. I think that was like $2, maybe $1. As far as the screen, I got the best I could get was stainless steel. I got it at a Wireworks down on, I think, 4th Avenue in Seattle. Not sure if all of that is still in place because it's in the Soto district and it might have been replaced by a stadium or something. But anyway, then I worked with my friendly neighborhood woodworker and built screens, which have lasted for 40 years. He did a really good job. And so stainless steel, 1 foot square pieces mounted between 2 layers of wood. There's like a top piece and a bottom piece with the screen sandwiched in between, has stood the test of time. And I always clean it real carefully in between different varieties of seed to keep them from getting mixed accidentally. And then when it's all done, all the material like the fruit pulp and the chaff all goes into this wonderful compost pile. which, whoops, lost my picture. Let's see, where are we there with? I don't know if you can see any of this, but anyway, nice black stuff coming out of there. So enough of that.
Well, thank you so much for showing that process. I'm sure that's a similar, there's a pattern to it. So if you learn it on those, like you can still winnow with other varieties, you can still use the blender method with other things. So I'm sure that'll be really useful for people as they're getting
Yes.
started on their seed saving journey.
Yeah, I would suggest getting a small electric fan and then like a plastic tarp to spread on the ground. Turn the fan on low and then pour the seeds down, and it'll do exactly what I use the wind for. I like working with the wind because it's just so organic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it connects me with my ancestors who I know did the same thing. They didn't have electric fans, but somehow they actually not only survived, but thrived for about, several millennia before modern times.
Yeah. Well, I guess as we're kind of coming to the end of our time, I'd like to know from you if you have any final words on why should we save seed? Why is it important to save seed? What is the important why behind it for our viewers today?
Well, I'm going to use the example of a plant that most people would not even consider harvesting or growing, and that is cow parsnip, which is a fairly common roadside and also mountain meadow plant in Western Washington. Looks like a giant carrot in a way, with big white heads. They flower in May and June, and nobody really eats it. It's very marginal survival food and sometimes even toxic. And so many years ago, when I first came to the Peninsula, I got some press. I got it from Newsweek magazine, and they sent out a reporter here on the Peninsula to see what I was doing. And it was June, so I didn't have a lot to work with because most plants weren't ready yet. But I did have the cow parsnip, so I took the reporter out and said, here's the plant, here's how I harvest it, and so forth. And the reporter said, well, what's it for? I said, well, hardly anybody uses this, but I collect it because it's there, and because it's native, and because it's part of a community. And why do I need to do that? Because habitats are being disturbed constantly, and places are just getting erased, sometimes overnight. So we have to be advocates for all these plants. Like, we have to adopt species, you might say. So I have that relationship with cow parsnip that hardly anybody's going to plant these seeds, but I'm going to collect them anyway, so that we have the ability to restore them if their habitat gets disturbed. And over the years, I have actually sold, some pounds of cow parsnip seed, some years none, some years a lot. And so therefore I'm kind of a family member with them, so that they don't get erased for not being pretty enough, or not being edible enough, or just make up a reason why, they're not good enough. They're definitely good enough, and I'm their advocate.
Something you said earlier about Nootka rose and how it does spread by seed often because it's spread by wildlife. They eat it and then they produce these fertilizer packets with the seeds in there and drop them. And hey, aren't we wildlife too? So as long as we're incredibly impacting the environment around us, we should also spread seeds as well and put back some of that environment.
Yeah, I would say we have the potential to be part of the wildlife, but it depends on how much stuff we bring with us, because it gets in the way sometimes. For example, that thing I described earlier about vine maple getting whacked because somebody didn't have the patience or maybe skill to remove the problem plant instead of whacking the desired plant. So yeah, we're wildlife when we think, when we do the practice of the wild, which is an expression Terry Snyder uses in one of his books. It's called Practice of the Wild. And I'll just recommend that for people to get their mind into what we've just been doing here for an hour. If you want to get the rationale for it or understand, how I evolved into this situation, I am doing the practice of the wild. It's not the same as a practice of like civilization, I guess. And it's not against civilization, but civilization alone is not going to, whoops, I got a little yellow jacket interested in my computer. So it must be time. That was interesting. Speaking of the wild.
Yeah, and of course, when we say civilization, we're referring to post-settler colonial concepts of civilization. Just pointing that out because I know a lot of the species we're talking about have a long, since time immemorial history with Indigenous people that are still leaders in conservation across our county. And camas is a really important food plant in their ancestral tradition. And so it's super important to make sure that it stays around, it stays protected. And just a quick note to anybody who's viewing as well, we're going to post some links in the show notes about interacting with camas ethically, because that's something that we shouldn't be digging unless you are a member of a tribe and there's a certain process people can go through to be able to dig camas. But if you ever see camas, help it spread, don't dig it up. Just want to make sure to mention that here in case people start reading about how camas is edible and maybe want to try it.
Let me just segue onto that by saying we have a little over an acre of native prairie left here in Port Townsend of what used to be several hundred acres. And based on working there for the last 35 years as a steward, eventually I co-formed with others something called the Olympic Peninsula Prairies, which was our gesture to organize the preservation of local prairies and then enhance those prairies and even try to start new ones. In the process, we had a ceremony with the Jamestown S'Klallam people, who are our nearest tribe here, a couple of years ago. We went out in July and dug some camas. Probably the first time camas had been dug on that prairie in, could be 150 years. It was a very dry summer and it was very hard to even break the hard crust of the ground to get down where the roots are. We tried it with a digging stick. That wasn't enough. The ground was too hard. So we used the actual garden tool, and they got down there and they dig up some roots of camas, as well as chocolate lily and other prairie species. And that helped kick off their program of starting a prairie from scratch near Squim, which is now in its second year. And I hope it's thriving. So we can do that. We can preserve, or we can renew, or we can start from scratch.
Yeah, and maybe we'll even have some work parties coming up on the PCD side of planting some of those things. So there's nothing concrete yet around that, but we definitely want to be involved. And we know as a local government organization, we have an absolute responsibility toward making sure that things like camas and natural resources stay around and remain a part of our local ecology. So we'll put some more resources around that for those who are interested in reading and learning more about it. Thank you so much, Forrest, for showing us how to winnow and how to save seeds from berries and separate the seeds. And thank you for talking about the heart of all of it. And hopefully this will inspire a lot of you who are watching to, if you are going on a hike, maybe pay attention to things when they're going to seed and be their legs, and make sure that these plants spread with us and have places to live in perpetuity since time immemorial and until and beyond. I don't have a good word for the future, but forever.
No end.
Yeah, no end. I mean, time immemorial encapsulates that whole concept, right? It's like, since it's outside of time in that way, because it's forever moving forward and moving backwards. And we definitely want these plants to be a part of that and don't want to destroy them. So thank you for showing us generative and regenerative techniques and interactions with plants today.
Thank you for the invitation. Glad to welcome you to the garden.
Thank you. I am going to end the recording. Thank you to all of our viewers. And if you have any questions, there's also going to be a link where you can email or ask questions as well. So thanks again, and have a wonderful afternoon, evening, or morning whenever you happen to be watching this.